Do you know what hurts more than being in a relationship that hurts you? It's continuing to love someone who makes you suffer, while your soul silently begs for help. Is there an emotional prison more cruel than the one you built yourself with the bricks of hope and the cement of the fear of being alone? You're not here by chance, maybe no one knows, but you've been crying silently for someone who doesn't even bother to ask if you're okay. And even though you know this person won't change, that this love corrodes you, there's still a part of you that insists on staying, and this part sabotages you. It feeds on beautiful memories, on moments that have already died, and transforms all of this into a toxic illusion called hope. Ajanu, what if I told you that this love you feel isn't love? That perhaps what you call a deep feeling is actually an emotional response built from your own history of pain? That even before you loved this person, you already carried open wounds that only deepened with this relationship? What you feel isn't a sign of weakness. It's just a reflection of an emotional need that's never been healed, of an old void you try to fill with someone who only empties you even more. And that's why you can't stop loving. Because it's not just about the other person. It's about you, about what was missing back then, about what you still don't understand about yourself. Today, you'll discover why you insist on loving someone who only hurts you. And more than that, you'll learn the path to freedom, but not with ready-made phrases or empty advice. What you'll find here is clarity. It's confrontation. It's the chance to remove the blindfold and look courageously at what you've always tried to justify in the name of love. Because it's not love if you have to shrink yourself to fit in. It's not love if you live in doubt, in pain, in waiting. True love doesn't make you bleed inside while smiling on the outside. What you're experiencing, perhaps, has a crueler name: emotional dependence, anxious attachment, fear of abandonment. And until you understand that loving someone shouldn't cost you your peace, you'll continue to give away what's most precious to someone who doesn't know, doesn't want, and won't value you. It's time to break out of this spiral. It's time to turn the key. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect, because those who don't choose themselves end up being chosen by anyone. So prepare yourself. Every word from now on is a step toward your emotional freedom. And it's not about forgetting someone. It's about remembering who you were before this pain, and most importantly, who you can be after it. Love as a shield. When love becomes a defense against inner loneliness. You say you love, but do you really love? Or are you just afraid of being alone? Is this emotional connection truly love? Or is it just emotional armor you wear every day to avoid facing the emptiness that exists when no one is there for you? Often, what we call love is actually an escape, a pretty disguise for a pain we've avoided facing for years. Love, when used as a shield, isn't a cure, it's anesthesia, an unconscious way of protecting ourselves from ourselves. Love, in these circumstances, becomes a survival strategy, because loving someone else seems less frightening than staring into the mirror. You persist in this relationship because deep down you fear what you'll find if it ends. And it's not about longing, it's about the feeling of helplessness, of emptiness, of uselessness. You fear going back to being just you, as if that were not enough, as if your existence loses its meaning when you're not busy trying to save someone who doesn't even want to be saved. And that's the most dangerous thing: loving to avoid pain, loving to escape silence, loving to numb yourself to loneliness. In this scenario, love becomes a shield that doesn't protect, but imprisons. You're not giving yourself, you're hiding. You're trying to convince yourself that this feeling fills something inside you, when, in reality, it only prolongs a hole that grows ever deeper. If you were to stop right now, at this very moment, and ask yourself sincerely, who am I outside of this relationship? What would you answer? If your world revolves so much around this love, it's because your inner world has perhaps stopped turning, because you've lost yourself in the process of trying to be enough for someone who doesn't see you. This kind of love isn't about presence, it's about absence, an absence of connection with yourself, of solid self-esteem, of preserved identity. It's a love that requires you to forget who you are to keep someone by your side, a love that forces you to become smaller and smaller to fit the other person's emotional fragility. And the more you try to love, the further you distance yourself from yourself, because this feeling isn't born of plenitude, but of need. It doesn't come from abundance, but from scarcity. You love as if begging for validation, as if begging for meaning, but no one can give you what you refuse to build within yourself. That's why it hurts. Because it's not love, it's absence, it's fear disguised as affection. It's a desperate attempt to avoid encountering loneliness without realizing that sometimes it's only in solitude that the soul breathes again. You don't need someone to feel whole. You need to allow yourself to exist beyond the function of loving the other, because when you love only to escape yourself, you abandon yourself. And self-abandonment is the most silent and cruel way to die slowly. The ghost of the promise. How the first version of a person traps you in the past. You're not stuck with who this person is today. You're stuck with who they were. To the first version. To the veiled promise you believed when their eyes shone and their words still held the flavor of truth. That's why you can't leave, because deep down you still await the return of someone who no longer exists. In the beginning, everything felt right. The gestures were light, the care was constant, and the other person's presence made you feel finally seen. It was as if, for the first time, someone had seen the most hidden parts of you and said, even if silently, "I'll stay." And you believed it. How could you not? After so many falls, this affection felt like shelter, refuge, healing. But time passed, and that version faded. The gestures changed, the words disappeared. Care became demand, lightness became heaviness, presence became absence, and yet you're still there. Why? Because your mind refuses to accept that that first version was just a manipulative introduction to a story that was never truly written. You cling to what you experienced in the first few months as if it were an anchor, but that anchor is sinking you. It's like waiting for summer to return while remaining in the cruelest winter of the soul. The pain comes precisely from the constant comparison between what was promised and what is being delivered. Each day you wait for that old version to resurface, and each day ends with more frustration. The most perverse thing is that sometimes that person even reappears in fragments. A loving gesture, a message that sounds like "I've changed," a convincing apology, a good night. But all of this is bait. It's just enough to keep you trapped, to feed you a false sense that things can go back to the way they were. This is the cycle. The memory of the first version becomes the fuel that keeps you going through everything that came after. You're not loving what that person has become. You're loving the memory of what they were. And the problem with memories is that they don't change. They remain idealized, frozen in time, impossible to confront with current reality. You're not in love with the person. You're in love with the hope that they'll return to being what they once were. But that hope is a ghost, an emotional specter that appears at night to keep you awake, longing for a past that has already betrayed you. And ghosts, no matter how familiar they seem, lead you nowhere. They only keep you trapped in an emotional captivity that you insist on calling love. It's not the person holding you back. It's the illusion you refuse to bury. It's the unfulfilled expectation that you've turned into a personal mission. You don't want to save the relationship. You want to prove that the beginning wasn't a lie. You want to justify everything you tolerated afterward. But that proof will never come. Freeing yourself isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about recognizing that what was good no longer exists, and that if you keep waiting for that version to return, you'll be wasting the one thing that can't be recovered: your time. Silence as an accomplice. When you don't speak, love becomes captive. You say nothing, but you feel everything. You swallow words, choke back tears, and mask your frustrations. Every time you silence what corrodes you, you surrender another part of yourself to the other person. And the worst part, they don't even notice, because silence, when it becomes a rule, turns pain into routine, and routine into captivity. You've learned not to complain, not to demand, not to expose, not to bother, because deep down, you believe that any attempt to express how you feel will be used against you. So you adapt, you mold yourself, you nullify yourself to keep the peace, to avoid arguments, to avoid appearing fragile or exaggerated. But those who adapt too much forget who they are. Silence becomes a form of survival. You begin to trade your dignity for small moments of apparent tranquility. You accept crumbs of affection in exchange for not confronting what's wrong. And in this silent pact, love ceases to be an encounter and becomes emotional submission. You become a prisoner within your own feelings, and it's not that you don't know what's wrong. You do, but you're afraid
Because saying it out
loud would make it too real, and maybe you're not ready to face the truth head-on. Silence, in this case, seems less painful than the consequences of speaking, but it's an illusion, because silence doesn't prevent the pain. It only makes it more lonely. You think you're protecting the relationship by saying nothing, but in practice, you're sabotaging any possibility of rebuilding, because there's no healing where there's no truth. There's no fresh start where no one says what they feel. And you stay there inside, screaming inside, while on the outside you pretend everything's okay. And every time you don't speak, you legitimize the pain. Every time you tolerate what hurts you without reacting, you teach the other person that it's okay to treat you this way. Silence becomes complicity with emotional abuse. And the cruelest thing is realizing that deep down, you're more committed to maintaining the appearance of love than to truly experiencing it. You deserve more than that, more than suppressing your own voice to sustain an illusion, more than living on high alert so as not to provoke reactions in others, more than getting used to emotional absence. Speaking out is an act of courage, a cry for freedom. It's when you stop asking permission to exist within your own story. If someone can't bear to hear your pain, perhaps they never loved the real you. Perhaps they only loved the silent, restrained, edited version of you. But true love doesn't require silence. True love listens, welcomes, shares. True love doesn't teach you to be afraid to express yourself. True love doesn't require you to disappear so the other person can remain. You weren't made to stifle feelings. You were made to overflow, to be whole, to be true. And if you have to lose someone for being honest about your pain, so be it, because worse than losing someone else is losing yourself in the name of a love that never really existed. The goodbye that saves. How choosing to be yourself is the greatest act of love of your life. There comes a time when moving on is more painful than leaving. And it's not because you've stopped loving, it's precisely because you still feel. But you finally understand that loving doesn't justify staying where there's no reciprocity, where your soul is torn apart day after day by small negligences, by absences disguised as presence, by words that never arrive, and actions that are always lacking. Goodbye at this point is no longer an act of rebellion. It's a gesture of lucidity. It's when you realize that, no matter how much it hurts, you can no longer ignore what the mirror shows you. And what it reveals is someone exhausted. Exhausted from insisting, from trying, from waiting, from convincing themselves every single day that the little they receive is still worth it. But it's not. Because the love that asks you to extinguish yourself will never illuminate you. Saying goodbye is the moment you decide to stop fragmenting yourself for someone who never knew or wanted to see you whole. It's not about losing, it's about recovering. About putting together the pieces you scattered, trying to sustain a bond that only existed on your part. It's at this moment that the choice shifts focus. For the first time, you no longer choose the other person. You choose yourself. And this is the hardest decision because it requires you to undo every emotional strand you've built as a refuge. It requires you to say goodbye, not only to the person, but to the version of yourself that believed that love was enough. But it's in this break that healing begins. When you say enough, the pain changes form. It stops being paralyzing pain and becomes liberating pain. It stops being a silent scream and becomes a silent reconstruction. You begin, little by little, to occupy the spaces that were once filled by the other person's absence. Saying goodbye is creating space for something new. Not necessarily a new love, but a new you. A self that no longer accepts halves, that is no longer satisfied with shallow promises, that no longer accepts being just a backdrop in the story of someone who never made a point of making you the protagonist. This new self learns that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival, it's emotional justice. What holds you back isn't love, it's the distorted idea you've created about what you deserve. But now you know, you deserve nothing less than a complete presence. You deserve truth. You deserve respect. You deserve someone who sees you as a priority. But more than that, you deserve to be your own priority. Parting is painful, yes, but what if it's precisely this that will save you? That will show you that, despite the fear, the longing, the guilt, you are capable of living for yourself, that you can build a life where your well-being doesn't depend on the mood or desires of someone who was never truly there for you. You don't need someone to choose you. You urgently need to choose yourself. Look within and say, I will no longer put myself last. I will no longer beg for attention. I will no longer justify the unjustifiable. This is the time to close the door you've kept ajar for too long, to mourn not the other, but the expectation that held you captive, to bury the hope that only made you bleed, to finally declare, I choose myself, and from now on, whoever wants to stay may find me whole. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, turn on the notification bell to be notified of our posts. Until the next video.